Hello, I'm Lisa Valerio, the founder and president of the Phoenicia Foundation. On behalf of myself and the board, we'd like to thank you for listening to this webinar that is part 2 of a 6-week series on the importance role of nonverbal communication. This webinar is presented by 2 amazing and passionate speech pathologists, Luna DeCurtis and Dawn Ferreira. Part 2, they will cover nonverbal communication across the lifespan. This series would not be possible if it was not for our sponsors, Silicon Valley Bank Foundation and the Lewis Greenwood Foundation. Phoenicia Foundation is honored by their support and all of our volunteers and donors who help us achieve our mission of helping special needs children, their families, and their communities thrive. If interested in learning more about Phoenicia Foundation, visit our website at phoeniciafoundation.org. Thanks again for listening, and I will now play the pre-recorded webinar by Dawn and Luna. Thanks again for joining us.
Hello and welcome back to part 2 of our series on nonverbal communication. Today we're going to talk about nonverbal communication and how it changes over the lifespan. As we mentioned in part 1, nonverbal communication is the first language we all use to communicate with our caregivers. In infancy, the facial expressions, gestures, body language, vocalizations, which are considered a form of nonverbal communication, they are there before the recognizable words. The coos, the goos, the grunts, the giggles of infancy, and sometimes beyond, those all represent a form of, if you will, nonverbal communication. Also we communicate through the skin-to-skin contact, through cradling, rocking, providing comfort. That all sends a message to the infant about the closeness, the warmth, the safety. So infants are also learning how to interpret nonverbal communication very early on. Then as we move into toddlerhood and the preschool years, this is really when we're on the move. During toddlerhood and preschool years, nonverbal communication becomes more intentional, more specific, and more universally recognized by groups outside of the family of origin. We see a greater range of emotional nonverbal expression with actions such as the foot stomping, the head shaking, the shoulder shrugging, the jumping up and down with excitement or frustration. We also see more dramatic tantrums, full body engaged. Not only sometimes is it very loud verbally, but the nonverbals are even more pronounced at that age. We see the distal pointing off in the distance, the joint referencing, as Luna mentioned in the first part, looking with your eyes and referring, the referential, looking away and having someone look in your direction. So now we do that too with the pointing. Joint referencing to call attention to something of interest, now being used with early developing social groups of friends and teachers at preschool, casual playmates in the park, or people in the community. One of my favorite things to do when I'm out and about and I see children this age looking in my directions is play that game of peekaboo, nonverbal, from a distance, or the imitation game. A child frowns, I frown back, child smiles, I smile, I look away, I wait for that child to look at me, and then I look at the child giggles. This is all nonverbal play. Now, I know the parents really appreciate this because they get a moment to enjoy their meals in peace or to quietly shop, but this is something that I've done for years, and I absolutely love establishing that nonverbal communication with children out in the world. Luna's going to tell us a little bit more about nonverbal communication in the school-age child.
Now, as kids get older, they start to become more proficient in using nonverbal communication and understanding it. And for many children who go into a school building, they now have to be able to understand it while a teacher uses it. When we think about a teacher using it, she may put her finger up to her lips to signal to quiet, or again, to put her hand up to say stop. She might just sit there waiting quietly. And these are now opportunities for children to learn how to interpret nonverbal communication in a group setting. Children start to use it more with their peers as well. Maybe when they have to, they're looking at a friend and giggling over something that happened, but they don't say anything, they're just looking across the room. Or when they're out at lunch, if they want somebody to come sit next to them, right? And they point to the seat and they tap it, come here. It could also be used when you want to exclude somebody. Maybe you move over so that that person can't sit close to you. Or maybe as you see someone coming, you run away, sending a signal you don't want to play. Other ways that it can be inclusive for making friends, of course, calling people over, just running towards somebody, maybe even grabbing a hand and pulling them. Typical behaviors you see during recess, like you would see games being played, tag or chase, where you don't really need the language. It's not dependent upon the language, but just dependent on kids tuning into each other, how they use language and how they're interpreting it. So Dawn will talk about now teens and dating.
Yeah, we move into the tricky teens and the interesting adolescence of it all. As we move into this area of nonverbal communication, we see that it becomes increasingly more important in the development of complex emotional and formal relationships, such as bonding and identifying with a particular peer group, or the onset of flirting or dating. The use of our eyes to convey interest or disinterest, boredom or excitement, apathy or engagement is more targeted and pronounced, or dramatic, if you will. And it occurs to me that when I was growing up, there was an expression that we often use, which is, she just shined me on. What does that mean? That means that I was ignored, or someone turned away from me, or they didn't acknowledge me. And that's all through nonverbal means. We're very sensitive to that during adolescence. The body language used in adolescence often gives us insight into personality characteristics and self-image. Does walking with a little swagger say, hey, I'm cool and confident? Or does walking with your arms across your chest with your head down purposely say, I'm an introvert who feels uncomfortable in large crowds? Teens pay more attention to how they walk, stand, sit, and move through the world, and what impression that gives us, as well as paying more attention to how others move through the world for clues and insights about who they are. Are they someone that I want to get to know, or are they someone I want to stay away from? Now, as we move into the adults in the workplace, Luna has some things to tell us.
Ideally, as adults, we become experts in both reading and using nonverbal communication. We need this in the workplace to be able to communicate effectively with our colleagues. And whether that's in a small boardroom meeting where you're looking around and you're taking note of the interests of people, are they looking interested and engaged, sitting forward, or are they leaning back, tapping their pencil, distracted, looking at their phone? This is your chance to interpret what others are doing. And it's also a chance to really switch channels when you need to, because as adults, we become nonverbal code switchers. So it depends on the social context, right? Maybe sometimes being casual with friends is the message you want to send, but at work, you want to change your body position to look more alert. Perhaps when you're with your family, you do certain things non-verbally, whether that's in proximity, how close you stay to somebody, whereas outside of your family, to keep a greater distance, a physical distance. And all of this is that 90% of the message that is nonverbal, under the words or beyond the words. But as adults, we do need to see how we are communicating our own messages nonverbally with our own expressions. Our words may be saying one thing, but our face might be saying another, and how we are understanding other people's messages, maybe misinterpreting them, and maybe needing to go back and clarify. And again, this continues through the lifespan. Dawn?
Yeah, you know, Luna, something that I'm thinking about regarding the nonverbal code switching is that, you know, at this point, as adults, we've had a lot of experience with nonverbal communication, and we're better able to mask some of what we're feeling and thinking through our nonverbal responses. In other words, you know, we learn that if I roll my eyes right now, not a good idea, especially in the workplace or at a meeting with your child's teacher, right? So we learn to contain some of those nonverbal responses and be more acutely aware of them and the meaning they convey. Now, as we age, we might be faced with conditions such as impaired or declining vision or hearing, or mobility issues that diminish our ability to read the subtleties of nonverbal communication. The quick glance, the raised eyebrow, or the slight change in body posture might be missed by some individuals because of some of these impairments. Conversely, certain neurological events or medical conditions might impede our ability to communicate verbally, and thus nonverbal communication becomes the primary mode of communication, just like it was in infancy. Nonverbal communication becomes meaningful and acts as a bridge for connecting with others once again as we age. So as we look at nonverbal communication across the lifespan, we come into the world using it. It changes and develops over the lifespan, becomes even more important in our ability to connect socially and understand others. And later in life, it may be something that we don't have as much access to understanding or using, or becomes something we rely on even more to communicate with. If, for example, there's been a loss of the verbal ability to communicate. In part 3, we're going to talk about some of the breakdowns that occur in nonverbal communication for various populations. Until then, we invite you once again to tune in to how you use nonverbal communication with others. Children, adults, in the workplace, with different groups of people, also what you observe about how others use nonverbal communication with you. We thank you once again for joining us. We hope that you will join us for part 3.
Take care. Bye-bye.